Before we check into today's video, please quickly check below to see if you've subscribed. It's totally free and allows you to never miss one of our stories.
In stellar surveys, planets are classified based on their ability to support life, as well as their abundance of resources. The presence of an atmosphere classes the planet as A, while no atmosphere, or not enough, classifies it as V. The gas giant Civix 8, for example, is a V-class extraction world. No atmosphere, but bountiful resources to be harvested from the gases drawn down to hover around the dense metal core. The presence of a metal core has led some scientists to joke that Civix 8 is the subject of long-term terraforming. If enough gases are removed to turn the rest into an atmosphere, the solid metal core will make it eminently suitable for life. After all, every educated citizen of the galaxy knows that there is no way any stable sapient life could develop on an unstable planet. Countless apparent garden worlds had been rejected for colonization due to their deadly heated cores. Only once had an attempt been made to settle such a world, and within 2 generations, a distress signal had been sent out on an emergency band to any who could receive. By the time even the first responders had arrived, it was too late. The planet had been mired in cloying black smoke, the thick ash choking the life out of every poor Asav colonist there. The mass death and the horror of seeing a garden world drowned in what looked like many species' visions of the place for punishment after death led the entire galaxy to collectively agree to never settle one of these planets. Death worlds they became named, and there was no bill to pass or resolution to support. It was simple common sense, accepted across the galaxy. Until the humans arrived. The mostly hairless mammals were already the talk of the galactic watering holes due to their military victories, even fighting the aggressively expansionist Dithrian Federation to a standstill. However, the true havoc was not what information was exchanged in military channels, but the logistics departments once humans got involved with the galactic community at large. At their favorite bar, Vherstinae waited for his friend. The blue hides of the Asav had fascinated the humans, who said they reminded of made-up aliens from back home. While the Asav had saggier flesh and were blue with luminous yellow eyes, they were oddly reminiscent of the little green men from human science fiction. Vherstinae idly scratched at one of the folds in his cheek until Kogombor finally showed up. The rust-colored scales of Ekeg's conical heads made them easy to pick out of a crowd, and the portly reptilian slid into the booth opposite his friend. Vherstinae dutifully passed Kogombor a glass of juice, the citrus already helping to take the edge off, and being a light intoxication in the Ekeg.
"You look like reheated waste,"
Vherstinae remarked, his jaw vibrating to assist his warbling speech. His statement wasn't meant to be an insult or a joke. Kogombor never took the best care of himself, packing on more weight than was normal for his species, but the Ekeg's 3 eyes were sunken and hollow, and he looked less than himself. Kogombor sighed. Normally, the treble beat of the background music would settle him, but today it was only aggravating his headache. He gulped down the rest of the juice and snatched a bottle from Vherstinae's side of the table to pour himself another.
"I was part of a meeting with the human delegation this week."
The way he said that made one of the folds above Vherstinae's eyes raise. They were both in public service. Vherstinae handled licensing of mass transport vehicles, while Kogombor was an administrator of the Planetary Survey Corps. The two had bonded over being desk jockeys and become proper friends with their shared love of various sports.
"This week? And you still need a drink?"
Kogombor gave a triple side-eye to his friend.
"We just finished today."
That brought the Asav up short.
"So you've been meeting with the humans for an entire week? Sheesh, how picky are those mammals?"
Kogombor let out a wheezing yelp of a laugh.
"That's just it. They're not picky enough. They're all crazy."
He went to lift the glass, but his hand was shaking so hard the juice almost splashed out. The Ekeg resigned himself to no more intoxication at the moment.
All right, walk me through this,
Vakix prompted gently.
How did this all start?
Kogombor took a deep breath, this time managing to bring the gloss to his narrow lips. It all happened because Pheresa was on a so-called extended break. Most Snicti were dour sorts and preferred to work diligently with as little social interaction as possible. Common rumor declared it to be a result of their homeworld having a dense liquid metal core rather than a solid one, and that was why the insectoids were so strange. But Pheresa was strange for a Nicti, flighty and impulsive. She still did her work, at least enough to not get sacked, but used her veteran status to leverage longer than permitted breaks. Had she actually been at her desk, seniority would have dictated she be collected for the job that had come down the pipe. Instead, Kogombor was plucked from his beloved desk and cushioned chair and herded into a conference room. He was given only a smattering of time to be introduced to his superiors for this meeting. Secretary Vati, a few rungs up the ladder from Kogombor's own position, was the actual representative of the Planetary Survey Corps. Kogombor was mostly there to make sure his boss didn't look bad, in more ways than one. Vati was an archetypical Nicti, abrasive and results-oriented. His gray exoskeleton was wrapped in the gentle blue of the Corps uniform jacket. The other authority figure for this meeting was Mofan, Deputy Director of the Colonial Bureau. The Asev's presence told Kogombor exactly what he needed to know even before the gentle-voiced man could speak. This was a meeting for colonization opportunities. Specifically, Mofan elaborated, this was the first meeting with humanity for colonial rights. They'd finally rebuilt after the Dithrian conflict and were preparing to move outside their home system's various space colonies and dome arcologies. Mofan knew the laws inside and out and was the most personable of the group. Vati had a near encyclopedic knowledge of available planets, and Kogombor was there to cover for any planets Vati missed as well as to blunt his superior's prickly ways. Eventually, the humans arrived, and it was always interesting to see a new species. The humans most superficially resembled Asev, but there were almost more differences than similarities. Asev's skin sagged down into folds, and their eyes were a solid, luminous yellow. The Asev were completely hairless, relying on their thick hides for protection, and the skin folds to help with heat management. The humans came in varying shades of beige and brown, with white eyes sporting colorful irises. They all had tufts of fur on their heads, and some also had fur around their mouths. Pink lips pulled back to reveal a collection of teeth, most blunt, but some pointed and others narrow and sharpened. Strange creatures. The humans came with several aides and bodyguards, most of whom were content to stand in the background like Kogombor and serve as decorative furniture. The humans all wore drab green uniforms, each with a badge over his or her chest, a silver circle breached by an upward-pointing narrow triangle, framed by feathered wings, the emblem of the Space Exploratory Force. The two in the lead, who would actually be negotiating, stepped forward with bright expressions and open body language. Each one sported gold decorations on their shoulders. The first human introduced himself as Scott Carson. He had lighter skin than most there, some odd mottling of darker spots across his nose and upper cheeks. Light brown fur topped his head and spread across his face along his jawline and mouth. His co-worker was Stefan Guiterres, which threw Kogombor for a loop. Most species had rather universal naming conventions, but these two didn't even seem to share the same base language in their names. Guiterres was darker, closer to some tree barks. The black fur on his head was longer and he sported none on his face. Once introductions were finished, Mofan smiled.
We appreciate you coming to us. Several times in the past, diplomatic incidents have occurred due to new members of the interstellar community simply deciding to settle a planet without checking if it was already claimed. That you've come here first does credit to your people.
Well, humans pride ourselves on being good neighbors, Carson replied with an easy smile of his own. After that unpleasantness with the Dithrian Federation, We wanted to make sure that nobody else would stumble into a fight with us. Kogambor was certain that Mofan must have heard that specifically chosen turn of phrase, but he held his tongue, and Mofan likewise made no mention of it. We've done research of our own into the various planets near Sol space, so we wanted to focus on those. Which ones are available? Which already have claims? That kind of thing. Carson continued. Mofan gestured to his side.
My colleague, Secretary Vati of the Planetary Survey Corps, can talk you through the available planets, and I can advise you if you wish to contest a claimed planet due to diplomatic or religious reasons.
The Nikti nodded.
Inform me of the grid coordinates, and I will list the planets available for colonization claim.
He didn't offer to inform the humans of which planets were already claimed. Kogambor could feel that this was a bad move and so spoke up.
And I, as the Secretary's assistant, can tell you about any claimed planets in the area.
He could feel one of Vati's sunken eyes roll in its socket to look at him. In hindsight, of course, he probably should never have offered.
Predominantly, this area of space has numerous gravity-sufficient V planets that are available for claim simply because it is costly to build habitat domes.
Vati sank into his job with aplomb.
The planet currently designated Physics 5 might be ideal for this. It is extremely rich in resources and would afford you the opportunity to trade frequently for supplies needed to sustain an early V-class colony, while still keeping enough for yourselves.
Carson nodded thoughtfully. And I presume that all of the garden worlds in the area are already claimed? Mofan tilted his head back in agreement.
Obviously, garden worlds are exceedingly rare and valuable. Every civilization has laid claim on them, and we primarily distribute them via raffle with an advanced algorithm to prevent favoritism. However, we have a policy that a species must wait at least 2 Asav generations, that is, approximately 46 human years after joining the galactic community before they can begin staking claims on garden worlds.
It was Gutierrez who spoke up next. To make this process smoother, we did research ahead of time, particularly on garden worlds. While there are 7 that you record in your database as garden worlds, we counted at least 10 more that fit the definition. Why are they not counted as garden worlds? For example, Carson's more gentle tone cut in. There's one garden world relatively near Earth, which has no claim on it that we can see. Warren's Memorial. Mofan, the kind-hearted diplomat, couldn't maintain his composure. What? He bellowed in shock and dismay, causing Kogambor to jump and Vati to look sidelong at the Asav. I'm sorry if I've given offense, Carson said gently to the distressed Asav. We noticed it was uncolonized and even unclaimed, and Stefan and I wanted to know why. You simply glossed over that region of space, however. With a name like that, is it left alone for religious reasons?
Memorializing the horrific deaths of some 40,000 Asav could be considered a religious reason,
Vati replied bluntly, drawing Mofan's horror over to him at his casual reply.
But no, the planet is left alone because it has a molten rock core.
Carson and Gutierrez both blinked, waiting several seconds for more information that never came. Finally, Carson took what he figured had to be bait. Yes? And this is a problem? Mofan took a heavy breath, the folds around his eyes pulling sideways in a grimace.
Sirs, I don't know how humans value their people's lives, but 40,000 Asav died in agony on that cursed planet. We renamed it to honor their loss and have since avoided every death world, no matter how appealing it might look on the surface.
Gutierrez blinked again. I'm sorry, but death worlds? What makes it more lethal than other planets? Vati parted his mandibles to say something, but Mofan thankfully cut him off.
The planet now known as Warren's Memorial was once a shining jewel in the galaxy, a garden world, with a nearly perfect environment for raising food crops, plenty of natural resources, and abundance of minerals. The small initial colony expanded, and in 2 generations was expected to be a thriving new provincial capital, a representation of the Asav spirit and the herald of a new colonial age. Then one day, an emergency signal spread out across every frequency. All of us in the Colonial Bureau have the quote memorized. The planet is breathing fire. The skies turn black. The very air chokes our children. Please, someone, save us.
Even Vati seemed moved, mandibles silently twitching while Mofan composed himself. Finally, the Asav spoke again.
By the time the first responders arrived, just freighters who couldn't feasibly carry many people safely, but still wanted to help, the entire planet was covered in a black cloud. Our sensors couldn't penetrate, and it was determined that the ash was too dangerous to vessels, so we couldn't descend to explore for survivors. It didn't clear for years, at which point we found the bodies of the colonists mummified in ash.
Carson was the first to respond. My God, I know it's not worth much, but I'm so sorry for your loss. A volcanic event like that's planetary extinction. All 4 of Vati's eyes swiveled to focus on Carson.
What kind of event? You speak as if you know of these things.
Carson nodded slightly. Well, a lot of us thought Krakatoa was going to be our end, and paleontologists theorize at least one volcanic mass eruption was the cause of an extinction in our ancient history. The silence was so oppressive you could have heard a Bazan shedding.
What's a volcano?
Cogumbor was shocked to find that he was the one who'd spoken, so entranced with the nightmarish exchange that he'd apparently lost his self-control to remain quiet like a smart menial. Gutierrez fielded this question. The word volcano takes its name from the Roman god Vulcan, who was said to live in mountains and bend the fires within to forge the god's arsenal. The name was applied after Mount Vesuvius erupted and the Roman city of Pompeii was covered in lava. Vati chittered his annoyance.
The translation software must not be working correctly. Erupted? Lava? These words are not coming through.
Carson and Gutierrez shared a look, one that promised even more misery for poor Cogumbor. All right, Carson took over. I think we're going to have to define some terms. Deputy Mofan, what sort of core does your home planet have? Mofan blinked.
Solid metal,
he replied as if it was the most natural thing imaginable. Honestly, it was. Secretary Vati, how about you?
Naxviti has a super dense liquid metal core,
the Nikti responded. Carson turned to the Ekeg. And Mr. Cogumbor, right? What does your species' homeworld have? Cogumbor blinked.
Solid metal. The Nikti liquid metal core is rather anomalous.
Carson grimaced a little. Well, believe it or not, the core of our homeworld, Earth, is made of molten rock and metal.
It is bad taste to joke about this,
Vati snipped. We are not joking, sir, Gutierrez growled slightly. He motioned one of the aides closer, a stocky female. Do you have basic geography saved on there? He accepted a small computer at her assent and opened it up to an article about volcanoes. Volcanic eruptions occur primarily when pressure within the Earth's core rises. The excess molten material is pushed upward. Active volcanoes are exit points for this material, called magma, when beneath the surface and once lava it emerges. While most are underwater and cause little destruction, only leading to oceanic mountain ranges, sometimes the eruption underwater can be forceful enough to create tidal waves.
I need you to stop again.
Vati waved a segmented arm.
What does the orbit of satellites have to do with molten rock?
The humans shared another look, Carson taking over when he parsed the meaning. Ah, right. Literal translation. Unfortunately, tidal wave is a bit of a misnomer, but the term stuck. In human parlance, a tidal wave is a forceful surge of water, in contrast to the more gentle motion of the normal tide. Earthquakes and underwater eruptions can both contribute to enormous tidal waves, though so can island volcanoes of sufficient magnitude, like Krakatoa.
All right,
Moffan stammered.
We're talking about too many things at once. Mr. Gutierrez, you were saying something about a city that was destroyed. What happened to that?
Gutierrez shrugged slightly. Well, neither Scott nor I are Roman scholars, so this might not be totally accurate. Pompeii was a wealthy city in the old Roman Empire, a powerful and widespread human nation of ancient times. It had rich soil for raising crops and was well located for trade. It rested at the foot of Mount Vesuvius, and for generations everything went well. Moffan swallowed hard, anticipating where this would go. Then the ground began shaking and smoke poured from the top of the mountain. Nobody knew what it meant. Some thought it was a sign of the gods' favors. Others thought it was an omen of disaster. Eventually, Vesuvius erupted with enough force to almost instantly bury the city in ash, lava sweeping over much of the farmland. Thousands of years later, historians finally uncovered mummified bodies and intact buildings buried beneath packed down ash and lava rock. Cogumbor couldn't stop himself.
So, what happened next?
Well, after a few generations, a new city was built on the ruins of the old.
At the base of the mountain?
Moffan asked, incredulous. Gutierrez chuckled. The land there was too rich not to farm. And now that the people knew what a volcanic eruption looked like, they could see the signs and flee. At least, that was the reasoning. Vatty held up a chitinous finger.
Something else you mentioned. What is an earthquake? I suspect it is not simply making the ground shake.
Carson took this one. Well, yes and no. He bobbed a hand. Because the Earth has a molten core, we also have what's called the mantle, which is a semi-solid mass on which the crust, the actual land on which we live, rests. The mantle can slide as a result of pressure and magnetism changing within the core. And when that happens, things called tectonic plates, the various chunks of the Earth's crust, grind against each other. This causes what we call earthquakes, the friction of the planet grinding against itself. Most earthquakes are minor, many not even noticeable, but others can open enormous sinkholes or crush together to create enormous mountain ranges. Moffan seemed enraptured in a kind of horrified awe.
Your mountains are born from your planet fighting itself?
Carson chuckled. I suppose that's a way of saying it. You guys know what mountains are, so how did you get yours?
Ancient meteor showers,
Cogumbor answered before the others could.
Water carved through crater basins, leaving mountains behind. Or enough meteorites struck that craters broke into mountains. This is why a subset of the Planetary Survey Corps is dedicated to monitoring meteor clusters, to ensure such catastrophes do not befall the modern peoples,
Vatty continued.
I must admit, Moffan said softly, I find myself morbidly curious about this Krakatoa.
Carson laughed under his breath. Not surprised. Krakatoa was the closest thing to what the secretary thought of when he heard earthquake. He took a dramatic pause to draw in their attention. When Krakatoa erupted, the sheer force could be felt on the other side of the planet. Not a tectonic grind, but the pure reverberation from the blast carried through the crust and mantle to everywhere on the globe. Astronomers estimate that the force was so drastic it actually altered Earth's orbit slightly. The aliens all muttered horrified oaths to their various religious figures.
And this is normal?
Morphan finally asked. Not really normal, but it's something we live with, Gutierrez replied. Volcanoes, wildfires, hurricanes, tsunamis, earthquakes. We joke that Australia is trying to kill us. But honestly, after seeing your reactions, it might just be the entire planet. He took a breath. So, Warren's memorial. Have you kept an eye on the planet to see if anything else has happened?
After we found our people mummified and entombed, we abandoned the world as a place of death. Very few people have the fortitude to even look at the planet, let alone study it,
Morphan replied. Carson and Gutierrez leaned in, whispering to one another, then looked back. Could we be excused to another room? We need to have a discussion. Thankful for the chance to be away from the beings who live on a death world, Morphan tilted his head back.
There is another conference room outside and to your right. You can use that.
Once the humans left, he collapsed into his seat.
What have we encountered? A people who were born on a death world? One that spits fire and ash, wars with itself, and gods only know what hurricanes and tsunamis are, and fires that run wild?
It does explain how they were able to face the Federation, Vati remarked. The Dithrian war machine couldn't be stopped except by an alliance until the humans faced them. A species tempered by a world actively trying to kill them. It makes far more sense how such a people could fight the Dithrians to a standstill. Morphan gulped in air.
What do we even say to them? Death worlds have been a source of collective trauma for generations. How can we introduce our citizenry to a species that developed on a death world and whose planet is still actively hostile? They'll seem like monsters, living nightmares.
Kogambor was too afraid to voice his opinion, so after a pause, Vati spoke again.
This does offer an opportunity, one that we would never have otherwise found.
Two of his eyes focused on each other person in the room.
Death worlds are often rich in resources. We now know that the humans do not fear fire and ash. If they likewise see other death worlds as opportunities, we will be providing the humans with access to worlds none of us can use, and opening the galactic market to the minerals, foods, and chemicals to be extracted from those planets.
The Nikti was clearly about to say more, but the conference room doors reopened, and the humans filed back in. Carson wore a tentative smile as he spoke for his group. Well, we have a proposal for you. Call it a proof of concept. I don't know if Warren's memorial is still too deep a scar to allow another species to settle there, but we'd like the right to colonize one of your death worlds. If we're successful, and I'm all but certain we will be, this will be a major achievement.
And we'll put humanity in a valuable and powerful position,
Vati noted. He'd just been floating the same idea, but now was questioning the humans' motives.
Suddenly, these planets' worth of resources are accessible, but only to a single species. Human service would become a valuable commodity.
Should we apologize for being good at surviving and dealing with crises? Gutierrez remarked. Kogambor could see the gears turning in Vati's mind. The Nikti gave the insectile equivalent of a smirk.
There is a death world near Sol Space, a planet called Calfit 2. In addition to its molten core, it deals with electromagnetic anomalies.
Gutierrez's damnable smirk didn't waver. What sort of electromagnetic anomalies? Vati seemed primed to frighten the humans, hoping that a new exotic hell might discourage them, or at least make them less smug.
The magnetism builds electrostatic energy in the atmosphere, which builds to a fever pitch, altering pressure that causes waves of air to tear across the planet's surface with enough force to uproot ancient trees and erode stones into polished curves. The electricity is not content to simply force air back and forth. It crashes out of the atmosphere into the ground with enough energy to flash-fry dirt into glass.
Ah, Carson said calmly. Thunderstorms. We're familiar with them. Moffan once again gawked.
These things are common on your planet as well?
Well, what the Secretary is describing sounds more destructive than a regular thunderstorm. A brief wave of relief passed through the aliens. More like a hurricane or monsoon. We have areas of Earth that deal with those for months at a time, based on the change in seasons and atmospheric pressure.
They didn't.
At this point, Vacix was only protesting for its own sake. He was willing to believe just about anything regarding these Deathworld freaks. Cogumbor polished off the bottle of juice.
Oh, they did. Every Deathworld. They had an anecdote to associate it with the Earth. It's as if their planet is the ultimate Deathworld, and yet the humans multiply faster than Dithrians. It got even worse the second day. We served refreshments then, ostensibly to be good hosts, but I think it was just to be able to drink while we negotiated, as the humans discussed colony establishment, and they were confused at the drinks we served.
He paused, letting Vacix stew in anticipation.
Citrus isn't an intoxicant for them. In fact, it helps reinforce their immune systems.
Vacix raised a fold above his eye.
Then what gets them drunk? Alcohol!
Cogumbor waited for his friend to scoff and laugh.
Yes, humans drink actual poison to get tipsy. Gritter has even told stories of people called alcoholics addicted to poisoning themselves, who'll drink actual cleanser just for a hit. So they use alcohol to disinfect and clean, but also drink it, and they haven't put together that this is a bad idea?
Vacix chuckled.
These are people whose world wants to exterminate them. I'm not at all surprised that they think intoxication should come at the cost of health.
The three-eyed reptile shrugged.
So, these meetings for colony discussion couldn't have taken an entire week if you had most of it hashed out on the first day. What else were you forced to do?
Vacix asked, quite curious as to just what his friend had been subjected. Cogumbor sat back in the booth, finally starting to relax after bearing so much of this week's trauma.
Well, after we resigned ourselves to the fact that humans didn't find Deathworlds that scary, we started discussing how they handle their catastrophes on Earth. Humans are used to a lot. Every year they get surges of air and rain and electricity that tear through coastal lands, whipping storms across central plains that form like funnels to suck up and rip apart anything in their path. They even have a disease called influenza that kills millions of their number every year on Earth alone, and they just accept it and move on. I suppose it's something you just live with when you've never known an alternative. It also explains how good the humans are at responding to crises. Did you know 3 of their habitats have been struck by asteroids? Take a guess how many they were forced to abandon.
It was a terrifying event when an asteroid actually struck a station or arcology. The sheer horror and devastation were only exceeded by true nightmare events like the extinction of Warren's memorial. Vacix knew that this was going to be some sort of trick question. With any other species, Vacix would have said all 3. With the humans, though,
2?
He decided to be cautious. Even keeping 1 struck habitat would be an amazing achievement for humanity.
None!
Cogumbor chuckled at Vacix's dumbfounded expression.
They built their habitats with the anticipation that something would go wrong and they'd have to seal off sections. All of their stations and arcologies have enormous airlocks between sections, and the larger domes and station centers have buildings which can lock down into a self-contained atmosphere.
Even with everything else, Vakix was still floored.
They plan for mass deaths? They plan for having to sacrifice survivors so everyone else can live?
What sort of monsters had been forged by the death world of Earth?
According to Carson, they're used to saving who they can, but they accept that not everyone can be saved. Humans have taken the idea of battlefield triage and applied it to all of their numerous crises. On the upside,
Cogumbor continued,
they're happy to share their modular station designs and consult on disaster relief and mitigation, so that the next time our habitats face a freak meteor storm, we don't suffer total casualties.
Vakix paused, then began to laugh. It started low, then began shaking his shoulders until he was braying his mirth. Once he'd finished his little freakout, and the rest of the bar was staring at him, he rubbed his hands over his facial folds.
Warren's memorial was intended to be the herald of a new golden age of colonization. I suppose it still is, just not in any way we could have anticipated.
He took in a few gasping gulps of breath.
Part of me is morbidly curious to see humans' own educational work, to see how casually they frame things like lava. The rest of me is too scared to even try. But I suppose we have a chance to see these death worlds tamed by the people who developed on what might be the worst death world of all. A molten core that routinely spews itself at them.
He shook his head.
If you'd been anyone else, Cogumbor, I'd never have believed you.